more volume. All right, can everybody hear? Can everybody see the screen? I know you can. Yeah. Everyone can see, we're good? I don't know, do I need? Yeah, why don't you come over here? Camera's right there. Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you guys can all see my PowerPoint I have up. If you cannot see it, please let me know in the chat so we can make sure everyone has access to my presentation. Okay, Escrow 101, life of an escrow, everything from start to finish, things to know. If you are experienced and know everything there is to know about escrow, if something's come up, feel free to ask me any questions. If you have transaction specific questions, I'm happy to answer those as well. You just let me know whatever you guys need. There's no escrow that's the same. There's a difference in all of them. There's new things that come up all the time. So there's no question not worth asking. So, and here we go. Okay, so what is an escrow, or who is escrow? We are the neutral third party between everybody. We take no sides in any transaction. Everything to escrow needs to be in writing. It needs to be exact. It needs to be fully and mutually assigned and executed and agreed between all parties. You know, we do not take, oh, I want to draw an addendum for credit. Did both sides agree? Do we have a signed addendum? Is this part of the purchase contract? Like, it needs to be in writing. It always needs to be signed by all parties if it pertains to both sides. If it's just for the seller or just for the buyer, then that's different. But everything should be in writing. It should be very clear. It should be very exact, black and white, so that any party that's involved can understand exactly what change in terms there are or what's part of the purchase agreement. Always very important to make sure everything is fully executed and everything is mutually agreed upon, and then handed to the escrow company or escrow officer so that they know, okay, this is a new term, this is a new amendment, this is a new escrow, everything's been signed, and then they can proceed. Terms to know in escrow. So amendments is a big one. You know, our escrow instructions are based on the purchase agreement. A lot of times, you know, the purchase agreement has the EMD, sorry, they can't see your screen. Oh, no? Sorry, I just found out we can't see the screen. Hold on 1 second. Go to Zoom. This one? Oh, okay.
Sorry, guys, we're going to share the screen with you so that you can see Sarah's presentation, okay?
Oh, there, that looks better. Right? Yeah, that looks like it's actually shared now.
Okay. So,
okay. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, Erica. Sorry, guys. Hopefully it's all good now. When I was just discussing what is an escrow, what is escrow holder, you know, we are in charge of keeping everything neutral between all parties, making sure everything's mutually signed. Terms to know, amendments. So escrow instructions, when we draw up, sorry. Bring that back. Okay, it's not. Thank you. Sorry, guys. So amendments, when we draw up our escrow instructions, they're always based on the purchase agreement. Whatever you give us fully executed when we open escrow is how we draw our escrow instructions. A lot of times people always question the earnest money, the loan amount, and the balance to close, because I don't know how it happens so quickly, but most of the time, by the time the contract's been signed and we open escrow, the lender will let me know the loan amounts change. It's completely different. Maybe there's a counter in price. Maybe, you know, they change their terms or program on their loan, but the escrow instructions will always match what's on the purchase agreement. As soon as the loan amount changes, as soon as the buyer's vesting changes, the purchase price changes, there's credits, we're going to draw an amendment to every, you know, to amend our escrow instructions. All amendments will supersede the escrow instructions. The escrow instructions do not supersede the contract. So it's always important when you, she went backwards on. It's always important when you draw a change in your purchase agreement, like not only asking escrow to draw an amendment, it's important for you as the realtor to draw an addendum to your contract. It changes your purchase agreement as well. You should do an addendum to that contract. Anything you do to change should be matching my document. So your addendums change the contract, my amendments change the escrow instructions. Sorry. Good. So addendums and amendments should all match and reflect, the contract and the escrow instructions. But most lenders do require both as well, an addendum and an amendment to change both documents because they require both the purchase agreement and the escrow instructions.
Sorry. Can you explain what the difference between an addendum and an amendment is?
There's really no difference. They both alter, amend, correct the document that they're changing. So escrow instructions are originals that we're sending. The amendments, they amend the escrow instructions. They don't amend your purchase agreement. They only amend my documents. So it's important to do an amendment to the escrow instructions, and it's important to do an addendum to your purchase agreement. It's important to do both. They're the same, but again, the addendum changes your contract. The amendment changes my escrow instructions.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to do both, absolutely. Appraisals. So it's a misconception that the escrow holder gets a copy of the appraisal, that we get notified of the appraisal being done, completed. I can definitely follow up with the lender and ask and find out the status, but we never get any kind of notification or a copy of the appraisal report from the lender. The only person that's allowed to get a copy of the report is the buyer. If the buyer chooses to share it, or if there are issues on the appraisal report that may change terms in the purchase agreement, then they will share it with all parties. But typically the appraisal is not something that escrow ever gets to see or knows about. I don't even get to see the value. So appraisals are definitely done between scheduling between the realtors. The report gets sent to the buyer. We can follow up on status, but it's not something that an escrow holder will receive. Close-Up Escrow. So Close-Up Escrow is the date that all the documents are recorded and escrow would be officially closed. That's when the buyer becomes the owner of the property, title insurance becomes in effect, homeowners insurance should come into effect. Everything happens on the date of close of escrow. And that would also be considered recording. It's also known as the confirmation date that we get from the county recorder. The deed of trust is a document that secures the note against the property. So the note is something that the lender will draw to like a promissory note for the buyer or the borrower to promise to pay. The deed of trust is what backs up and secures the note. So even though this note is original, it's not recorded, it goes back to the lender, it's the original, the deed of trust secures the lien against the property. That gets recorded at close of escrow along with the grant deed, any quitclaim deeds, any other recording documents all get recorded at the same time of closing. Earnest money deposit, otherwise known as the EMD, again, found on the purchase agreement. I know the contract standard written in says that the EMD is to be delivered within 3 business days of acceptance. I can't tell you how many times I have had buyers tell me they have no idea that they have to have it in within 3 business days. So I would just recommend when you are going over the purchase agreement with your buyer, you just make sure they're understanding and aware that they have to make sure that they're ready to submit that earnest money within 3 days of the accepted contract. So, we obviously can't receive funds on a Saturday, but most banks will allow the buyer to wire on a Saturday. If they wire on a Saturday or at the end of a business day on Friday, we won't receive the money until Monday. So it's something to always keep in mind. Or if there happens to be a holiday, also something to keep in mind. They may have to wire it sooner than 3 days just to make sure it's in within that time period. So when we do the earnest money deposit, it's also good to make sure that your buyers talk to escrow directly. There's so much wire fraud, email fraud, hacking. There's just too much going on that is not secure when it comes to sending money back and forth between escrow and client. So when you do open escrow, just make sure that you give your buyer all of our escrow contact information or give escrow your buyer's contact information so we can directly communicate with the buyer and send them instructions direct. So there's no in the middle person trying to transfer what they're supposed to do between us and the client. We send all of our escrow instructions for wires via secure encrypted email direct to the buyer or the party that's going to be sending funds. You know, sometimes there may be gift funds or sometimes there's funds coming from a third party, which is fine, but then we need that party's contact information to not only send them instructions, but to make sure that we verbally verify all the information for the bank, the details, and the dollar amount that they need to be sending. So it's very crucial when we first open escrow to make sure we have all that information so we can work on getting that EMD in within 3 business days. You know, sometimes people might counter it and say, like, we want it in 24 hours for 48 hours. Just keep in mind that you keep the buyer ready and up to speed on how quickly then that we need to get it sorted and get that money into escrow.
I have a question. Hi, it's Salima.
Hey.
I always get my buyer to, you know, submit his or earn his money deposit right away. But does it mean it has to be initiated within 3 days or it has to be in within 3 days?
Has to be in.
Okay.
The contract states it must be submitted by electronic transfer within 3 days. I mean, escrow does accept checks or cashier's checks for the earnest money deposit anyway. For final funds, that's a different story, but earnest money can be made either via personal check or cashier's check. But again, must be in within 3 days.
So it can be a personal check?
Yes, but make sure that you mark the box on the purchase agreement because it's already pre-written in standard that it's electronic transfer within 3 days. So if the client doesn't want to do a wire transfer, can't do a wire transfer, it's too difficult to, you know, make those arrangements, they can do a check or cashier's check, but you just need to make sure that you mark that box on the purchase agreement to change it versus being a wire.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, when it comes to final funds, they always must be by wire because we don't have time usually at closing to wait for those checks to clear. The funds are usually in large increments and they must be by wire transfer. So the funds are readily available in our account so that we may close without any turnaround time or waiting for checks to clear. Good question. I can switch. It's not letting me go to the next screen. Can you click for me?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Does the seller have the right to withdraw from the contract if the money is not in within 3 days? Is that what you're saying?
So yes, technically, after those 3 business days, if the buyer has not submitted their earnest money, it's breach of contract. The
Okay.
buyer has not complied with what was in writing in their binding agreement. So technically,
Those
yes, the
3
seller,
days, is it 3 days a default on the contract or it can be changed to whatever? Okay.
3 days is default. So
You can change
it's
it in the
usually,
RTA.
yeah, it's usually not longer than 3 days.
Okay.
If you do put on there that your buyer needs more time than that, oh, that's okay. I think I need a mouse with it. If your client does need more than 3 days, like maybe their funds are coming from a 401k, for example, which does happen. And usually with 401k funds, it takes a couple days to do a transfer. Those kinds of transfers are not immediate. There's paperwork involved or more paperwork involved when it comes to that for tax reasons. So let's say if you do need more time, I would just communicate that with the listing agent, say like, hey, I'm sending this offer, or in my offer, I am asking for more time on the EMD, and it's for these reasons. We're sending it from a 401k, and money needs to be moved around in order to get that EMD in, and it will take longer than 3 business days. So I would just make sure if your client does need more time than that, that you communicate that, so then the listing agent's aware. They're typically accommodating if they know, you know.
Thank you very much.
That one, or the next one, sorry. Yes, you're so welcome. Oh no. Next screen. Yeah, one. Good. Thanks. Sorry, guys. Okay, so easements. Most properties all have easements. These are rights of access to the property. So like for an example, if you're selling a home that has an alleyway shared by maybe another home on the other side. That easement or that alleyway is considered an easement. Most utility companies have easements. So like the gas company, the electrical company, if there are boxes or gas boxes, things that the city may need access to on a property, those are what the easements are for. Rights of access, rights of entrance, basically, so they can access the property at any time if it's necessary for that city or utility company or the alleyway that may be shared common property, things like that. It's always good to read through your preliminary title reports, which is where you'll find all those easements. You just never know what might be on there, which may, question the buyer, or they might want to know, well, who has rights to this and how long do they have rights? Does it ever go away? Which typically easements always run with the land. Hazard insurance, so home is also known as homeowners insurance or fire insurance. It's the only insurance that's typically required of the lender unless the property falls in a flood zone. So in escrow, if the buyer is obtaining a new loan, fire insurance is required by the lender. It's the only policy that's required unless, like I said, the flood is a part of if it's in a flood zone. Recognized by FEMA, must be in flood zone. I think it's A or B. Flood insurance, just a side note, is required to be paid up front. So if you are doing escrows or transactions in properties that are in a flood zone, keep in mind the buyer will need to pay that flood insurance up front and provide us with a copy of it, through escrow for the lender. That's something that they would require. Fire insurance in areas.
Is it 1 year of insurance is paid up front?
Oh, yes,
Okay.
good question. It's 1 year that needs to be paid at closing.
Okay.
Buyers can pay it up front if they'd like, and they do need to show proof that it's been paid through escrow because the lender will require it, but the first year must be paid. If the home is all cash and there's no loan whatsoever, the buyers can purchase the property without insurance at all. We definitely don't advise it. We don't recommend it. We have buyers sign an insurance waiver if they choose to obtain insurance on their own outside of escrow after closing. It's completely up to them if it is all cash. But yes, when the buyer is obtaining a loan, it's required to be 1 year upfront paid through escrow. Impounds. So impounds are also known as an escrow account, which can get confusing sometimes because a lot of people hear escrow account and think escrow is holding their funds or escrow is maintaining that escrow account, which isn't true. It's an escrow of money that the lender has established and is holding those funds on behalf of the borrower. So if the buyer's getting a new loan and I don't know what type of loan they're getting, or they've discussed with their loan officer that they would like to have impounds established, that's something that the lender sets up. That's something that the lender instructs us that it's going to be set up through their loan. They instruct us on how much to hold and collect for that impound account. There's an initial deposit on every escrow that needs to go into that escrow account at closing. So like, for example, the insurance is paid for 1 year. The impound account for insurance, if they're collecting insurance impounds, would be 2 to 3 months. So they'll take the annual premium, divide it by 12, and the lender will collect 2 to 3 months of insurance held in the escrow account. So then in 1 year from the close of escrow, when the policy is due to be paid again, there's really 12 months of mortgage payments that have collected over, each month that they're overpaying on the principal, interest, insurance, taxes, the impound account. And then the lender has a couple months of extra padding in there that they collected when we closed escrow in case that premium has increased over the next year. So impounds for insurance is usually 2 to 3 months. With taxes, the lender will let us know how much they want to collect for property taxes, if that's part of the impound account. And it depends on the time of year that you're closing because of when taxes are due. So like right now, most lenders might be collecting 4 months of taxes because the next bill is due February 1st, not delinquent until April. So they want to make sure they collect, because if you close, let's say today, your first mortgage payment won't be till January 1st. So they're making one mortgage payment, that's 1 month of taxes that they'll have paid to the lender into their impound account, but they still need to acquire the other 4 to 5, 6 months to make sure they have enough to make the next tax bill. So something that, you know, the buyer and the lender will work out when it comes to impounds, but just something good to know, because a lot of buyers do have questions. They don't know what an impound account is. They don't know how it works. They don't know who sets it up, who's maintaining those funds that are theirs to pay taxes and insurance, which is all the lender. Yeah. Or you can just tell them to reach out to, if they have questions about impound or the escrow account, they should talk to their loan officer about either establishing it or that they don't want it, or, you know, how it works. Legal description. So every property has a legal description. You know, it is generated by the city, you know, the county. It's all part of their maps, everything that's been recorded from when that property was, you know, built and divided in their land. So the legal description is important. It's definitely something to look at, because sometimes the legal description may list oil rights, mineral rights. If there's an HOA, sometimes it might list the parking space. If it does have an HOA, sometimes they talk about common areas. So legal description is something, again, you'll find on the preliminary title report, something definitely to look at. And if you have questions on the legal description, you can always reach out to title, or you can reach out to escrow, and maybe we can answer those questions for you. Title would probably be the best person when it comes to the preliminary title report, if you have questions on it, but it's definitely something to make sure you review and at least look at, so you can answer questions for your client if they have any questions as well, or you know where to direct them if they do have any questions. Liens. So liens are just like a deed of trust. That's an example of a lien, something encumbering the property that we need to pay off or remove when we close escrow. Other forms of lien can be judgments, tax liens. So it could be IRS tax liens, franchise tax board liens, home equity lines of credit. It could be child support judgments, child support liens. There's different variations of liens that can be attached to a property. When you're, again, looking for liens on a property, the preliminary title report is the way to go. When you're looking at what's attached to it, what needs to be paid, what's owing. I think also in your profile report, property profile reports from the title companies, you may be able to see what liens are the most recent liens that were done on the property, or a history of liens if they've done refinances, things like that. Escrow is responsible for ordering all those payoffs.
Can I ask a question? Okay,
Yes.
do we look for liens only on the property or on the buyer as well? So let's say the buyer has like a tax lien on him and he wants to pay all cash. Do we also look for that?
So if the buyer's all cash, the only way we would find any liens would be through the statement of information.
Okay.
Statement of information is required for both buyer and seller to complete and sign if they're signing as individuals. If the buyer or the seller is an entity, as like an LLC, a corporation, a business of some sort, their SIs are not required, and we wouldn't find any liens or anything like that on the individual. But if we do run the buyer's SI and they're getting a loan, you know, and a judgment comes up, it's up to the lender if they're going to require it to be paid. But the lenders typically, when they run the credit application and the credit report and things like that, they typically already know if there are judgments or liens in that buyer's name.
Yeah, that's why I asked if it's all cash. Because
Yeah, if it's all cash and it's an individual buyer and we run the statement of information and a judgment or lien comes up, the title company is okay with it since they're buying the property, they're taking ownership. So it'll be up to the buyer's discretion if they want to work on getting that paid or released. It is good to the buyer to know that if a judgment does come up in their name and they're buying this property, it may very well be assumed, it may be attached to that property at some point, or it may come up if they try to refinance or they resell.
okay, thank you.
But at that time, it will be needed to be paid.
Thank you.
Any judgments, liens, anything that's on the property that needs to be paid off, escrow orders all those demands. We order HOA demands, we order judgment demands, mortgage demands, home and equity lines of credit. Once we open escrow, we start prepping those so we can get demands in. Every demand has a different turnaround time. So it's good for sellers to get all their payoff information in soon so we can order those demands. I have one lender right now, it's a 10 business day. Not all of them are that way. Most of them are 24 to 48 hours. But sometimes you do work with banks that take longer, or if the seller is in default or in foreclosure, those demands typically take longer. PITI, so stands for principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. We typically see a lot of realtors mention PITI when they're trying to do a rent back. If the seller is going to rent back the property from the buyer after close of escrow, it's usually at the buyer's PITI. If you are doing a rent back and let's say the property has an HOA, I would recommend making sure you do PITI plus HOA dues or anything else that's paid on the property to make sure that the whole rent is encumbering all the fees to the new buyer, that the buyer's getting reimbursed for those costs. So principal, interest, taxes, insurance, and HOA dues if applicable. Power of attorney. So we do see power of attorneys in escrow. They're very specific when it comes to power of attorneys in a real estate transaction. The original power of attorney must be provided and recorded at closing. So if you have a client that's going to need a power of attorney, use a power of attorney, we do require the original and it has to be recorded through escrow in order for them to be used. They do typically want to see the property address listed in the power of attorney, so it's specific. There are general power of attorneys you can use, but it does need to have the verbiage that it encumbers power and authority to sell, transfer, purchase any kind of property, real estate. It all needs to be listed out there if you're going to use a general power of attorney. The title company must approve the power of attorney. If it's for the buyer and they're getting a loan, the lender also has to approve that power of attorney as well. Also, when using a power of attorney, there's a very specific way the power of attorney will sign. So it's very long. Like if it was Jane Smith signing on Joe Smith, the signature would be Jane Smith by Joe Smith as attorney in fact. And that's the signature every time that power of attorney signs. That's the exact format they need to sign in order for it to be a valid signature. So same thing with initials. It's, their initial, the signer's initials by the power of attorney initials, AIF. So it's very important that they sign that way every time. So if you have questions on power of attorneys, we can draw them up in escrow. They can go to a lawyer to draw them up if they need it. But if it's for a specific transaction, we can always do that in escrow as well. Quit claim deeds. So quit claim deeds are if you are quit claiming a portion of interest, or you're transferring names or like out of an individual into a trust or individual to a business or signing it. Typically it's not when you're transferring the whole property. It's just if like you're using an interspousal and you're doing it between spouses, or you're removing your child from title or adding your child to title. When you're quit claiming a portion of the property is typically when you're going to use a quit claim deed. When you're doing deeds outside of escrow, it's important to know that if they do refinance or sell after they've recorded deeds outside of escrow, there's typically going to be a title requirement for uninsured deeds. So title if there's deeds recorded outside of title insurance, title requires an uninsured deed to make sure that whoever signed that deed outside of escrow confirms there's no money owed to them. They don't have any other rights, to the property. They were, full authority and good standing and, fully aware that they transferred that property to the individual. So just something to keep in mind too, if you have people that have been transferring title, or there's a long chain of title that was, between family members, those family members may need to be reached out to sign uninsured deed affidavits that need to be notarized as well. They don't get recorded, but they do need to be notarized. Funding, so we talked about close of escrow. Funding is the date that the lender wires the loan proceeds for the buyer's loan. Those loan proceeds the funding is something the escrow and the lender do together to make sure that we balance to their wire amount, all the lender fees, everything that the lender collects. There's a loan amount of $500,000 and all the lender fees basically get deducted out of that $500,000, and what's left over, the lender sends that to title. We make sure that the lender gets the title company's wire instructions. We make sure that the funds have been officially sent to the title company. Once we know that the wire has been sent, then we can officially let everybody in the transaction know that the loan has officially funded. And then we verify with the title company that they've received that wire as well. Once the loan is funded, then we will record. We will set it up for recording with the title company. We make sure that all the recording documents are completed, everything is signed. We review everything twice before we send it down to the title company. We typically order a messenger for them to pick up the originals from our office. And when it comes to funding and recording, it kind of depends on the county you're in. LA County does not allow you to fund and record in the same day. So if your property is going to be in LA County and you're keeping track of your funding and closing dates, just keep in mind that you need to fund 1 business day prior to your close of escrow. So if it falls on a holiday or a weekend, just make sure you know that if you fund on a Friday, the buyer is paying interest over Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, even if they don't own the property until it closes on Monday. Same with Thanksgiving coming up. If you are trying to close the Monday after Thanksgiving and it's LA County, you would need to fund Wednesday, and the buyer would typically pay interest Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday until it records. So something to keep in mind when it comes to closing, funding, and recording. Things you will need to open escrow. So fully executed purchase agreement. I know it sounds crazy to say that because sometimes I get contracts and they're missing signatures, they're missing initials, there's a counter missing. The contract says, see attached addendum. I don't have the attached addendum. So definitely when you get ready to open escrow, or your TC you should make sure that you go through it, make sure everything has been fully executed. You have a fully binding contract between all parties and all addendums are attached, all counters are attached. If there's a tenant in possession form, if there's a contingency for buyer's sale of property, all those documents that are part of the purchase agreement. In order for us to open escrow and know all the terms, we need everything and we need it all fully executed and signed. Commission percentage. So we do need to know what your commission is. We don't typically get a copy of the listing agreement. So if there is anything in your listing agreement, terms that I should know, like if there's charges to the seller or transaction coordinator for risk management, a legal fee or anything like that, you're welcome to send me your listing agreement. But if not, then just make sure that I know those terms that are in your contract so then I know to charge the seller for those fees and collect them. And who do I pay and where do we send the checks? Those are important. Commission percentages, so let me know what the listing broker is going to receive, what the selling broker is going to receive. If it's a percentage, sometimes it might be a flat fee. I've seen that come across. You need to let us know so we can draw your commission instructions for each broker to sign. Client contact information. So when you open escrow, let us know who your client is, their name, their email, their phone number, their mailing address. The more information, the better. That way I have everything I need and I can reach out to your client to either find out where they want their documents sent, introduce myself, make sure I know where to send their package if I have a mailing address that's different than the property address. Same thing for the buyer side. If you're representing the buyer, when we open escrow, make sure I have all your client's contact information so I can reach out for the EMD, find out where they want their package sent, all those good things, introduce ourselves. Cooperating agent information. So when you open escrow, I can look at what's on the contract and pull the agent's cooperating information on page 10. But I do have a lot of times agents don't provide all their information on page 10 of the purchase agreement. When you're writing up your contract, I recommend you fill in everything. The more information, the better. So page 10 of the contract, make sure your cell phone's on there, make sure your address is on there, your office address, your email address. If you have a fax number, put that on there. On page 10, I can pull it all, just important to make sure that it's completed. Otherwise, I don't have all the contact information I need. Buyer's lender contact information. If there is a loan on the property, I can either take a pre-qual letter, or if you want to give me the buyer's, the agent's information, I'll get it from the buyer's agent. If you have all the lender's contact information, you can give that to me so then we can reach out to the lender right away. First thing the lender needs when we open escrow is fees. That's the one thing that they need right away so they can disclose to the buyer and start the clock on that loan. So it's important to get the lender the estimated fees right away and documents for the purchase agreement, addendum, same thing. They need everything fully executed as well. Title company information. So who is the title company? Sometimes it will be in the purchase agreement. Sometimes it's seller's choice, sometimes it's buyer's choice. So when you do open escrow, make sure to tell us who the title company is and who the sales rep is to make sure that that representative gets credit for that open order. Homeowners Association contact information. So HOA information is not public record. So when you do take a new listing, it's important to know and ask the client, does your property have a homeowners association? Does your property have 2 homeowners association? A lot of Mission Viejo, a lot of Orange County, some of those properties have 2 HOAs. So it's important to ask your seller so that they know, can tell us like, oh, this property has an HOA, here's the contact information, so that I could reach out and find out, how do we order docs? How much is it? What's the turnaround time? Most HOAs require their fees to be paid upfront. It can be anywhere from, I've seen it for low as 200, I've seen it as high as 1,000. So it's important to know that as well, because you don't want to shock the seller when we open escrow and they are responsible for paying for all the HOA documents and it's $600 and must be paid via credit card or a debit card. Usually it's upfront. So it's important to know that as well. We can always find out this information before you open too. If you have to file a new listing, it has an HOA and you want to find out, okay, so I know when I'm ready to open, how much is it going to cost? How long does it take for the docs? Because most turnaround times are 8 to 10 business days to get those documents. So if you have a 14-day escrow and you need to order HOA documents and it's 8 to 10 day turnaround, you probably will be paying for a rush fee, which can be anywhere from $100 to $200 more of the document fee. So good to know if you have an HOA, what the costs are, what the turnaround time is, how to order the documents. And we can look up all that information for you if you want to reach out to us when you have a new listing and have those questions. And I mean, of course, when we open escrow, we like to order those right away, especially because of those turn times. And we have to get credit card information from the client before we can even place the order. So, solar, hero loans, PACE loans. Some hero loans are going to be reported on the property. Some PACE loans, again, will show on the property as well, so on the preliminary title report. If there is solar or a hero loan or a PACE loan, that's another good question to ask your sellers when you're like going over, things on the property, loans that they may own. Does the property have any solar? Is there any hero loans for like roofing or, plumbing equipment? I've seen, I think copper plumbing, or I've seen the handicap plumbing be a hero loan. So it just depends, but it's something again to ask sellers. So when I get the title report, if you're like, okay, yes, I knew that there was going to be a hero loan, there's going to be a PACE loan. We have to pay these off. Another thing to know about solar too is the solar going to be, if you have a client that has solar, has it been paid in full? Is the seller owe any money? Is this going to be transferred to the new buyer? Is the buyer going to assume the balance? Is the buyer going to make payments? It's something also to know to make sure that the buyer gets full disclosure about the terms of that solar agreement. Additional fees, terms, anything else, like I had mentioned, if like what's on your listing agreement or something you've discussed with the seller that we may need to be aware of, such as a transaction coordinator fee. Is that something the seller's paying? Is that something the agent's paying? Is there a risk management fee that the office requires? Is that something you're paying, the seller's paying? Was there staging done? Do we have to pay a staging invoice? Were there repairs done? Do we have to pay a plumbing invoice, a moving invoice? I've paid all kinds of invoices through escrow. It's definitely good to make sure that we know we're going to be expecting these bills so we can make note and make sure that we pay them through the escrow. If the sellers or buyer is doing a 1031 exchange, that's another important thing too. Make sure that we get the exchange company's information, because the exchange accommodator is going to want the escrow instructions, the purchase agreement, the prelim report. If it's a buyer, we're going to have to request that they send funds. If it's the seller, we're going to have to make sure we send funds to them. Or any other terms or any other invoices, fees, anything that might be beneficial for us to know, or something that has to be done through the escrow, definitely make sure you let us know right away, sooner than later, so that we can anticipate everything for closing. Okay, so here's my flow chart for a buyer or for a life of an escrow. Buyer and seller sign your purchase agreement, your addendums, your counters, everything's been fully executed. The listing agent or the selling agent, whoever is opening escrow, lets us know, send us all the contracts, all the documents. We follow up with the buyer to make sure they submit their EMD into escrow within that 3 business day, unless the contract says otherwise. We order the title report when we open escrow. I know a lot of agents sometimes might get an order open when they take the listing. That is something you can do, like I said, to see what's on title, see what comes up, if there are any liens or judgments. And if you want us to review that report with you, or if you have questions, you can also talk to the title company about that report. It does take a few days for the report to come in. So when we open, we'll order it, and it does take a couple days. But it also takes a couple days to get the EMD. So we try to send everything out all at the same time: earnest money, escrow instructions, preliminary title report, NHD report. when we first open escrow. So escrow will prepare the instructions and the documents that I just mentioned. So we'll send everything out all at the same time. The buyer and seller should sign and return those escrow documents within 5 days. So once we send them out, they should hopefully return them within 5 days. That's written in your purchase agreement as well. So we try to follow up with them, to make sure that their docs come back. We make sure that they get UPS shipping labels, or if they're going to email the docs back, whichever is more convenient for the client. Most of our documents can be signed via DocuSign. We'll send out what we can via DocuSign, but the buyer and seller do have a lot of documents that they actually need to complete in full. So it's a little harder for those to be set up, like the statement of information, names, first name, last name, date of birth, past residential history, occupation history, previous marriages. There's a lot of information that they actually need to complete. There's a lot of tax forms for the seller to complete, franchise tax board withholding, 1099, seller FERPTA. There's just a lot of information for the seller to complete when it comes to tax forms. So we try to do everything as much electronically as we can. But again, the seller also has a grant deed they have to sign, and it must be notarized and must be original. So we typically, on the opening packages, we will most likely send hard copies unless otherwise instructed. And then we also include UPS labels and things so that they can be overnight back to us as soon as possible. Once we receive those documents back, we'll process everything and send out some supplemental documents. So when the buyer sends us their documents back, we'll send out a vesting amendment to everybody, because by then we should know exactly how the buyer is going to hold title. When the seller sends us their documents, we'll send out your seller FERPTA that most of your brokers require. We'll also send out, we'll also order the payoff demands as well for that seller once we receive all their documents back. So we receive the title report, we review that. The statement of identity is also known as a statement of information. So once the docs come back from both sides, we'll send the SIs, the statement of information, to the title company so they can run and abstract their socials, their names, date of birth, to make sure there are no judgments, liens, anything that may not be secured on the property that may be attached to their name and recorded. So if the seller has a child support judgment that's not been recorded against the property, but is recorded in the county against their name, it will probably come up and we will need to pay it, which means then I'll have to order a payoff demand for that. It does take 7 to 14 days for something like a child support lien. So good to know, good to get. That's why it's important to get signed documents back as soon as possible so we can process them, hopefully within the time frame of close-up escrow. Again, like I mentioned, we order payoffs, order demands. We'll review all those demands, make sure that all the data is inputted into our system. If we have to generate any documents, then we'll do that at that time. We continuously follow up with the lender for status of the loan, make sure that the lender gets all the documents that they need from escrow in order to process their closing disclosure, to get clear to close prior to doc conditions completed and cleared. We keep you updated as much as possible. As soon as we receive loan documents, we notify all parties and let them know the earliest buyer can sign. They're date sensitive. Loan documents can only be signed the day that they're dated. Some lenders allow you to sign after that date. Some lenders require you have to sign on the date the docs are dated, like Rocket Mortgage, formerly Quicken Loans. So very date sensitive when it comes to loan documents. Like I said, if there's any other reports and things that need to come in that need to be paid, like if termite was part of your purchase agreement, make sure that we as escrow get the termite report, make sure we get the completion if it's part of the transaction. We make sure to send out the HOA demands to all parties, and if there's any liens or anything with that, with the HOA, we'll notify you as well. Once escrow has received the loan documents, we will schedule a signing with the borrower. We'll notify everybody when the borrower is scheduled to sign, and we'll keep everyone posted on funding and closing. At the same time we receive the loan documents, we prep the seller's final escrow documents. Seller's docs at the end can all be DocuSigned. There's nothing usually at the end that they need to actually live sign or come in to sign. Seller's final docs will typically be their estimate, copy of any payoff demands or things that we're going to be paying through the escrow, any other amendments that were done throughout the escrow, and then anything that may be included in the loan documents. Sometimes there are CD disclosures that the lenders want the seller to sign. So that's why we typically wait till we get docs from the lender to prep everything for the seller to sign at the same time. When the buyer signs their loan documents, they're given the balance to close. At that time, we're also giving them wire instructions. So now that we have loan docs, their CD, their fees have all been finalized. There's no changes. So we know exactly at that point what the buyer needs to wire. So buyer will wire their funds, sign all their loan documents, everything comes back to us. When the buyer wires their funds for the EMD or funds to close, those all come to escrow. They never go to the title company. The only wire that goes to title is the loan proceeds. So we'll send docs back to the lender once we've received them signed by the buyer. We'll request funding from the lender or funding review. If there's any funding conditions, we work on those. Anything that the lender might need prior to funding. Once it's all been funded, we make sure to order a messenger for the docs to go down to the title company for recording. Lender funds the loan, title receives their documents, we release the file for closing, and escrow records, confirmed, we're closed. Everyone gets paid. So we disperse the file after closing. Again, once the title company has recorded and they've made all the payoffs for taxes, liens, anything else that's owed on the prelim, they withhold their fees, and then they send escrow the balance. So we record and close, but then I'm typically, if there's a loan, I'm still waiting for the title company to wire me the balance of the loan proceeds after they've made all their payoffs. If it's all cash, then I definitely have all the money and can wire and issue and disperse as soon as possible, as soon as I have fees from title. So we'll issue final closing statements, final closing packages, and send out funds to everyone and pay all the invoices, things like that. Okay, that's it. Any questions for me? Nope. Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
So any questions for Sarah, guys? You can go ahead and,
I have a question.
Yes.
How much does business opportunity escrow? How much is it usually?
How much is what?
Business opportunity. Somebody's buying a business.
Oh,
Is it price wise? Final price.
you know, escrow prices are all based on the purchase price.
Okay.
Yeah, it's anything, whatever the purchase price is what our escrow fee is based.
Is it a percentage?
It's $2 per thousand and a $600 base.
Okay, so $600 base, and then
Per
and then
$2 per thousand.
$2,000. Okay, that's good to know.
Good question.
Do you have it code?
I actually have them in the front here and in my office. I'll get it for you as soon as I'm done here.
No problem.
Okay, good. Any other questions?
I mean,
Thank you very much for everything.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thanks for joining me, guys.
you guys can find this on the Coastal Hub as well. It was reported. So if you find that you want to go back and just, go onto the mykWcoastalhub.com, you can go ahead there into the YouTube channel. All of our recordings can be down there, okay?
Thank you very much.
All
Thanks,
right.
guys. Good luck on your transactions.
Yeah.
Open lots of escrows.
Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome.
and I know that that's usually shared between seller and buyer. Yeah, 50-50.
Yes, unless otherwise, oh, I'm sorry, my.
Yeah.